Walter Martins lived a good life. He had a loving wife, a dog that he treated as his own son, and a respectable career as a journalist and TV show host. It came as a surprise to everyone when one day, he decided to end his own life, live on television. Every once in a while, I come across bite-sized games that end up sticking with me for much longer past their completion. The time spent playing may have been a handful of hours at most, but the time spent pondering all that it had to offer is multiplied by a lot more. One such game is TELEFORUM. It's a found-footage psychological horror game that released in October 2023, but that has stayed in my mind since. The reason this is because of all the questions left unanswered, even after playing the game repeatedly until 100% completion. Even after going through it again for this video, meticulously turning over every single proverbial stone, I'm no closer to an answer than I was 2 years ago. The premise is that you, as a cameraman for a TV station, visit the home of a widow, a woman whose husband, one of your journalist colleagues named Walter Martins, took his life on live TV. Your goal is to try and shed some light on why this happened, but as you go, you find yourself with more questions than when you came in. This is meant to be a prelude to the developer's upcoming game, Drowned Lake, so I'm guessing a lot will be answered then, but considering it's been 2 years already and there's still no release date in sight, all we can do for now is speculate, so let's give it a try. If this is a game you want to play yourself, now is the time to back out as there will be spoilers, but otherwise, good luck trying to make sense of all of this with me, and feel free to subscribe if you like this video. Also, if you come up with any theories as we go, please share them in the comments. That being said, let's dive into TELEFORUM. The game opens with you in an elevator together with your coworker, Juliana. As it's a found footage style game, everything you see is through the lens of the camera that you, as the cameraman, is carrying around with you. Your colleague tells you to push the button for the 6th floor, and as you ascend, you discuss the task you're currently on your way to complete. During this, you can choose to question the fact that you're bothering a widow, which I decided to do, to which Juliana responds that if you don't run this story, someone else will. You go on to talk about Walter's suicide. Juliana, who witnessed it with her own eyes, asks if you saw what happened, to which you respond that you were only told about it briefly, specifically about what tool he used to take his own life. She also mentions that Walter had handed in a VHS tape, requesting it be played during the broadcast, but technical issues stopped that from happening. As you finally reach the 6th floor, you can either head left toward the window or right farther into the building. I decided to go to the window first, where you can choose to say that it'd be nice to get some shots of the view here, which Juliana approves of and comments that you have a good eye. You also note someone has been coming here to smoke. And with that, you turn around and go to apartment 608. Here you can have Juliana either knock on the door or ring the bell. I chose to ring the bell as I wanted to be as respectful as possible in this situation that's obviously going to be hard on the person we're interviewing. It takes 3 tries before the door finally opens, but as you're waiting, you can choose whether to keep being sympathetic and question if the widow you're there to see will be okay with this visit, or to remain strictly professional and express hopes that your camera won't act up during the interview. So, as I tried being respectful, I went with the former. At another point, you can either ask Juliana about her experience working with Walter, or you can continue wondering about how the widow may react. When asking, "What if she won't see us?" Juliana states that she'll think of something else, clearly determined to get to the bottom of this incident. She also says that she doubts Walter's wife has left her home since yesterday, indicating that it all must be pretty recent. When the door finally opens, your coworker explains to the widow, whose name we find out is Adriana Martins, that the two of you are visiting as you're making a special program, an homage about Walter for the TV station you work at. Once let into the apartment, you comment on the fact that Juliana lied about this, and it was just something she made up to ensure they'd be able to go ahead with the interview. Mrs. Martins goes to prepare some coffee for you all, and as she does, you get the opportunity to look around the apartment a little. It's dim and quite eerie, but you can make out a few things here and there despite the lack of light. The first thing I interacted with was, of course, the dog, napping on the floor. Juliana mentions that his name is Gunpowder, and that Walter carried around a picture of the dog in his wallet, showing it to anyone who cared to see. Next, there's some certificates hanging on the wall. You comment on Walter's achievements from notable and respected universities, to which Juliana responds that both him and his wife are well-educated people. After that, I chose to interact with the small bookshelf right below the certificates. Juliana asks if there's anything interesting to be found there, to which you respond that there's a book that doesn't quite fit in among the rest. It's an electronics manual, and there's a bookmark on a page about the cathode ray tube, or CRT for short. I moved on to a different corner of the room after this, the one with the TV. On top of it, there's a weather rooster that seems to indicate that it'll rain today, though according to what Juliana says, there's no chance of that happening. When looking closer at the TV itself, you remark that something's off about it. Juliana states that there was a lightning strike nearby just the other day, which may have messed with it. Apparently, it happened the same day as Walter's death. Under the TV, there's a VCR player. The two of you discuss how expensive those things are, and Juliana mentions that Walter took out a loan to pay for it, cementing that it was obviously something that meant a lot to him. After this, I moved on to another corner, one with an armchair next to a big bookshelf. On this bookshelf, quite a few things are displayed. I interacted with a trophy first, one that was apparently awarded to Walter for an article he wrote back in the 70s. According to Juliana, the station's owner had hoped this award would put them on the map, which it didn't, and even seemed to lead to big stations trying to hush it up. There's also a framed photo of some blurry scenery on the bookshelf. Juliana mentions there has to be a story behind this, and it may be interesting to ask about. Once done with the photo, your time is up as Mrs. Martins returns with the coffee. After taking the time to consider it, she has decided to agree to the interview, so you all sit down for a chat. Here, you get to discuss some of the things you found in the apartment. The first thing I chose for Juliana to ask her about was the certificates on the wall. Mrs. Martins talks about her time studying theater, and that she first met Walter through an eloquence workshop where she was helping him out with his diction. She's the reason he's so well articulated now, or he was, before the incident occurred. Next, Juliana asks about the blurry photo on the bookshelf. Mrs. Martins recounts a story of her and Walter taking their first picture together, but the camera set up on a tripod was knocked over by a nesting bird. Walter had found it so funny, they ended up framing it as a memory. Juliana then asks about the TV in the living room, and her theory of the lightning strike having messed with it seems to be correct. Mrs. Martin says there was a blackout that day, as lightning hit right after the broadcast during which Walter had ended his life, and the TV hasn't been working properly since. Continuing with an adjacent topic, Juliana asks about the VCR player next. She remembers that Walter was a big fan of films and wonders what he liked to watch, a question that Mrs. Martins doesn't want to answer. She then decides to conclude the interview as she's not feeling up to it anymore, to which Juliana says she understands. Mrs. Martins continues talking about how Walter had seemed so nervous that day, but that she never expected what came next. Juliana agrees and says she can't even imagine Walter handling a gun, a comment that leaves the widow puzzled. There was no gun. Juliana protests. Of course there was a gun. She saw it with her own eyes. She was there. She looks to you to confirm her story, as you both work at the same place, you must have been told the same, but you weren't. You get to make a choice here about what you did hear, whether he used a knife, poison, or if he hung himself. Either way, your stories do not line up. Something weird is going on. Mrs. Martins, who's been quiet during this exchange, exclaims that things have been off ever since Walter received that tape, the one he wanted to play during the broadcast, but that was never shown as the tape had apparently been burned somehow. She explains that that tape was just a copy, and that she still has the original. She gives it to Juliana and says that she doesn't know where he got it from, nor what's even on the tape. Walter had made her swear to never watch it. She leaves the apartment to have a smoke, expressing that she doesn't even want to hear it in case you decide to watch it for yourselves. A bad idea, in her opinion. Juliana isn't deterred at all, however, excited to have a story on her hands. She asks if you'll stay to watch the tape, but even if you say no, she forces you to be in the room with her to document her reactions with your camera, even if you don't watch the tape yourself. You take your positions in front of the TV, and the tape starts. As Juliana's head is obscuring a big part of the screen, all you get from your point of view are glimpses. First, there's what seems to be a building with an open door, a red light emitting from inside. Juliana mentions she doesn't recognize it. Next, there's a blue screen with strange symbols on the left, and what looks to be a bigger symbol, or maybe a drawing of some kind, on the right. Juliana asks if it means anything to you, to which you can respond that looking at the symbols makes your head hurt, it gives you déjà vu, or that you can feel like you can almost understand them. If saying that your head hurts, Juliana states that for her, it's the eyes that hurt instead. After that, you get a shot of a corridor of some kind. Whoever filmed this walked inside the building from earlier, or at least that's Juliana's theory. There's a green light in here, and the walls are lined in what looks to be pictures of some kind. Posters, framed images, scrolls. It's hard to tell, and honestly could be something entirely different. Your colleague asks what kind of place this is, to which you can answer prison, shopping mall, museum, or school. Because of what I interpreted as pictures, I chose museum, to which Juliana doesn't argue, but she questions what's on display and wonders who would authorize such an exhibition. She also raises a valid point about whoever filming just walking past it all, and that the corridor is strangely long. Eventually, she sees a person farther down the building, someone you cannot see due to her blocking your view. The film then switches to what can be interpreted as a close-up of someone's face, and judging by Juliana's reaction, something's off about what's being shown. A cryptic whisper begins playing on repeat. And she turns the volume up, unable to understand what is being said. You have a few theories yourself, but none of them make any sense. Juliana turns up the volume even more, and you're suddenly faced with a text bubble containing nothing but unreadable symbols. Juliana says nothing. You finally get a chance to end this, and just as you're about to turn it all off, lightning strikes. A TV interlude plays, showing you a timetable of programs coming up. You hear the sound of a VHS tape being inserted. And then, you're back in the elevator. Juliana is there with you. It's almost as if you've started over from the beginning again, making your way to the 6th floor once more. But this time, she doesn't ask you to press the elevator button, she does so herself. It's the same as before, but still different. Juliana notices that you're acting a bit strange, to which you can say you're just experiencing some déjà vu, or that you're simply nervous, or that she looks different today. Does she really? What has changed? She doesn't make any small talk past this, and once you reach your floor, you notice that she seems rushed. If you go to the window again, repeating your steps from earlier to get some B-roll, her impatience grows even more obvious. And once you reach the door of Mrs. Martin's apartment, it's entirely unmissable. When ringing the doorbell, Juliana presses the button repeatedly, with absolutely zero patience. And when the door opens, she doesn't even say hello or properly introduce herself. This time around, she gets straight to business and doesn't even bother pretending like it's to pay homage to a valued coworker. Despite Juliana's changing demeanor, I decided I wanted to remain respectful and sympathetic to the widow just like before, so I challenged Juliana's behavior, to which she insensitively responds that this needs to be investigated, and that Mrs. Martins has her whole life to mourn. Stepping inside the apartment, Mrs. Martins heads off to make a cup of coffee for herself, despite Juliana's urgency, and you get a moment to look around again. It seems Juliana isn't the only thing that's changed. The apartment is not quite the same either. Gunpowder, instead of napping on the floor, is now more alert. You note that he seems nervous, or even afraid, of what you don't know. When taking a look at the certificates on the wall, Juliana remarks that Walter wasn't a complete dumbass like others at the studio. It's a bit strange, though. You don't recognize any of the institutions. As you check the small bookshelf just below the certificates, you notice that there's a lot of books, but none that really stand out above the rest. However, one appears to be missing. In the corner of the apartment where the TV is, what's shown on screen is different from before. Where once there was a flower, there's now a bird. And upon interacting with the TV, you're shown a glimpse of the title card for TELEFORUM, the show during which Walter ended his life. You mentioned that something about the TV gives you the creeps before you back away from it. Juliana then gets your attention in order to ask you to remove something weird that's hanging above the front door. As you check to see what it is, you notice that it's a horseshoe. Juliana all but orders you to take it down, explaining that it's getting on her nerves. Still trying to be the respectful one out of the two of us, I told her no, which she was not a big fan of. Deciding to take one more look around the apartment, when looking at the weather rooster, it's still indicating that it's about to rain. It's funny, you think, as the sky's been clear all day. Mrs. Martins returns to the room, and Juliana wastes no time getting to the point. Skipping all pleasantries and opening questions, she immediately asks about the tape, and somehow she knows that the one Walter brought to the station was a copy. When asked how she knows that, she simply states that they examined the one he had with him, offering no further explanation. As she demands to see the original, Mrs. Martins hands it to her and leaves the apartment to have a smoke. Here you can, just as so many instances before, choose to be either strictly professional and ask if Juliana wants to film the tape, or you can tell her off for her disrespectfulness. Choosing the latter, she gives way a little bit, explaining that this whole thing is making her antsy. She asks you to go check up on Mrs. Martins, maybe even take the chance to interview her and ask about the origins of the tape. Maybe this will be your big break. You head out into the hall, taking a few deep breaths before approaching Mrs. Martins. Upon inhaling, you notice an odd smell, different from the cigarette smoke, but you quickly shift your focus back to the widow. No matter whether your goal is to get an interview that will lead to more career opportunities, to make her feel a bit better, or to simply have a chat even if nothing specific comes of it, you need to talk to her. Mrs. Martins is wondering why you're the one asking the questions instead of Juliana, to which you can explain she's busy with the tape, that it's an opportunity for you, or that you're here because you got worried, the latter being what I picked, as nice and understanding as I'm trying to be. To this, Mrs. Martins responds that she's seen many people like Juliana before, people who stop at nothing to further their own goals. She agrees to you asking her a few more questions though, but warns you to think carefully before speaking as she feels like her head is about to burst. You can ask about her, about Walter, or about the tape. Continuing my streak, I ask how she's feeling, to which she understandably responds that she's been unable to sleep since the broadcast. She feels that maybe there was a way she could have seen it coming, especially since the atmosphere at home changed ever since Walter got a hold of the tape, his obsession mounting. Her answer to being asked if she knows where the tape came from is a no, but she believes it was delivered to their apartment. By whom, she doesn't know. She then asks why Juliana is so interested in the tape, remarking that greed was visible in her eyes. Mrs. Martins continues that she had expected the two of you to ask questions about Walter, as he was your co-worker, to which you state that that was the plan, but you don't seem too sure anymore. Interestingly enough, you're not the only one with a sense of déjà vu. Mrs. Martins says it feels like she's seen the two of you before, maybe through Walter? You respond that she's probably not seen you, at least, since you only started working at the station recently. Maybe that's why you don't seem to be like Juliana, she says, referring to the insensitivity and aforementioned greed. She expresses a sense of understanding for wanting to advance in your journalism career, feeling the need to chase down sensationalist stories, but then continues to state that nothing good came from this tape. You can comment in agreement, or you can explain that that's exactly why it needs to be investigated. I of course chose the former, which prompted her to question whether it wouldn't be better to just stop. If you mention not having the authority to cancel this story, she retorts that Walter never waited for authority to get things done, that Juliana probably didn't either. Sometimes you just need to do what you feel you must do, she says. She then tells you straight up that she doesn't want the story to be broadcast. Sensing your uncertainty about the situation, she asks you to drop your camera out the window and use her as a scapegoat, giving you permission to say she attacked you so you can avoid consequences at your job. And so, you drop your camera. At first, the screen fades to black, but then we see a shot of what looks to be a camera falling down something akin to an elevator shaft, with glimpses of other footage cutting in for split seconds. What seems to be the camera falling from the sky towards the ground, as well as footage of a man donning a suit. Then, a TV interlude plays again. Just as before, it shows a timetable of upcoming programs, until suddenly there's a slight disturbance on screen and there's an overlay of the footage of the man from earlier. One of the programs on the schedule switches to show TELEFORUM instead, but the time shown for it isn't a time at all. What does T124 mean? It cuts to black for a moment, and then you're back in the apartment building, making your way up. This time, however, you're not even in the elevator. You're taking the stairs. Once again, it's the same, but different. Very different. The goal seems to be more or less the same, though. You need to make it to... what floor was it again? What apartment? 608, right? Your colleague isn't with you either. What was her name? J something? Was it Juliana with 1 or 2 N's? 1, I think. Each step makes it harder to remember. What you saw in that tape changed things, but what was it that you saw? An unrecorded nightmare? Something you kept seeing and forgetting the name of? Was it the past of a future that never happened? Sure, let's go with the last one. In which future do I exist now? From which past did I come? You ask yourself as you trudge up the steps. You remember something. She stayed in the apartment. As you reach the 6th floor, you're met with a strange sound you can't make sense of. You have the option to go straight to the apartment instead, but you need to investigate. Turning towards the sound, you're met with a door that looks familiar. You're unable to open it, but there's a grate for you to peek through. So even though you don't have to, you do. Inside is a woman with her back turned to you. It feels like you've seen her before. You think. The sight of her makes you cry, but you don't know why. You turn around and make your way to the apartment and notice a weird smell in the air. Another thing that's familiar to you, but you can't put your finger on why. Just as you think you've done before, you turn left down the hallway. It's pitch black, but that doesn't stop you. At the end of the corridor, by a window, you find Gunpowder. He's whining, obviously upset about something. The city outside the window looks off, as if the buildings were too close. Next to Gunpowder, there's a charred stain on the floor going up the wall. It reminds you of something, but you quickly dismiss the idea. You decide to try to comfort the dog by talking to him, and you get the feeling he's avoiding the apartment. But as your camera temporarily blacks out, he runs away. You spot a note that he was lying on top of, and even though you don't have to, you decide to take a look. "I've had it and did what I shouldn't," the note says. "I now live the past of a future that never happened. I move through strange events, ephemeral facts, truth and lies no more than an idiot's dream. If anyone reads this, don't leave Gunpowder alone." The letters give you vertigo, so you put the note down and turn to face the apartment. You know a part of you needs to find out, to go in there and get to the bottom of this, but you want to leave. This has all been wrong since the start, you tell yourself, and decide to try the stairs as that's the way you got here in the first place. But then it rewinds. Once more, you see flashes of the man in a suit, and then you're back by the apartment. Okay, what about the elevator? You get inside, but then it rewinds again. You get flashes of something else this time, something that looks like a forest in the middle of the night. And yet again, you're back by the apartment. With no other choice, you walk closer, and a realization hits you. You debate keeping it to yourself, but it's something you feel you have to say out loud. The camera carries me, not the other way around. I can't even tell when this started. Perhaps a long time ago. Maybe when I submitted my application. With that finally said, you step inside the apartment. It's dark in here, darker than normal. The TV you've seen before is broken, with a giant crack in the middle as if someone hit the screen so hard it shattered. Is the weather rooster gone? The armchair by the bookshelf? There's a second TV now, but in another room. Gunpowder lies next to it, and though you don't particularly want to, you move closer. The TV is showing the title card for TELEFORUM, and as you approach, it begins playing Walter's broadcast. That's the man in a suit that you kept getting flashes of earlier.
Caros telespectadores, boa noite. Hoje nós teremos uma transmissão especial do nosso programa, possivelmente a minha última. E com ela trago um comunicado a fazer para todos vocês. Descobri algo nas últimas semanas que tem me assombrado desde então. Palavras não serão o bastante para descrever o que descobri. Portanto, eu vou precisar mostrar. E talvez isso venha assombrar vocês, assim como tem me assombrado. Mas a minha profissão, o meu trabalho, foi revelar a verdade durante todos esses anos. E se quisermos nos libertar, preciso que todos saibam disso que tenho a mostrar. Por isso, Peço que todos sintonizem bem seus aparelhos. Não cruzem suas pernas, isso é importante. Mas fiquem confortáveis com a coluna reta e observem com atenção.
And then it ends. You're thrown back into a menu with video clips, all of which you've seen at some point in the playthrough, but 2 of them are locked. If you want to find these, you have no other choice but to dive into the game again. When you return to the main menu, the play button doesn't actually say play anymore. Instead, it says rewind. On a second playthrough, things are different from the get-go. When Juliana asks if your camera is on, aside from the 2 normal choices, there's now a third one. It's like opening your eyes. It doesn't make much sense in the context, and it's surrounded by the symbols from earlier, the ones you saw while watching the tape. Upon choosing this, your colleague responds, "The camera, the mic, they become part of us." Snapping out of it, you're both confused by this exchange and move on to do what you came here for. Every choice you make differently gives you more information about this whole situation, some more than others. For example, if you ask Juliana if she got authorization by her higher-ups for this, she explains that she didn't, and that for sensationalist stories, it's better to get it done first and ask for permission after, as they will have a harder time saying no. It may not be something that helps figure out the mystery itself, but it does help you get a better sense of the big picture. If you ask her a little later how long she worked with Walter, she says that they had been co-workers for 4 years, and that this incident hit her hard too. You get to see that she does care about what happened to him, and that she's here not just for a story, but because she does want to honor him in the way that connected the 2 of them, their journalistic careers. It makes what happens in Act 2, when her demeanor changes to be only about the tape, all the more jarring. Some different choices do provide explanations to the more mysterious things, more or less. If you express hopes that the camera won't act up during the interview, instead of wondering if the widow will agree to talk to you, you'll learn that your camera sometimes blacks out randomly. This is what happens when you find gunpowder out in the hall in Act 3 and things suddenly go dark. That said though, nothing is ever spelled out to you, and a lot of what you find only adds to the ever-growing tangle of information that you somehow have to sort out. As you might expect, the objects you interact with in the apartment give you different pieces of info, some more relevant than others, and as you may have noticed before, all these objects are different when interacting with them again in Act 2. There's a painting of a lake on the big bookshelf that Juliana assumes Mrs. Martin's painted. When interacting with it in Act 2, you make this statement yourself. Asking the widow about it, she says that she likes to paint her dreams. There's also, of course, a lot of books on the shelf. When asking Juliana if Walter used to read a lot, she responds he'd focus more on newspapers, so the books must be his wife's. Mrs. Martins corroborates this, saying Walter did so to stay up to speed on current events for his job, and that he'd often complain about how younger journalists tend to not be thorough. Looking at the books in Act 2, Juliana simply states that Walter did read a lot, without specifying anything. You point out that strangely, the books here are all the same volume. By the door, there's a raincoat. Juliana reminisces about the time Walter bought it when covering a story by a lake where it rains a lot, and despite it being way too big for him, he felt he had to wear it as he spent so much money on it. In Act 2, you remark that the raincoat is wet, and Juliana says maybe Mrs. Martins used it the day before as there had been a storm. In Act 1, when looking at the horseshoe above the door, Juliana doesn't particularly react to it. She simply remarks that she didn't know Walter was superstitious, as it's something you hang for good luck. When asking Mrs. Martins about this, she says that neither she nor Walter are superstitious, and refuses to go into detail about the horseshoe. We already know that in Act 2, Juliana asks you to remove it. Depending on your response though, she may explain that the reason she wants it down is because it reminds her of her mom, someone she doesn't want to think about. There's a plant by the door, apparently dying from a lack of water. It seems Juliana finds that understandable, given everything that's happened. In Act 2, this plant is thriving instead. Something curious. If you look at the crack under the door, it seems there's someone standing on the other side. If you take a look through the peephole though, no one is there. However, you briefly see a shot of Walter from his broadcast. This is probably the only thing in the apartment that doesn't really change in Act 2, aside from the shot of Walter not appearing again. What you see through the peephole looks the same as in Act 1 though. Once you're done looking through the peephole, the shadow under the door is gone. Next to the armchair where Mrs. Martin sits during the interview, you make a note of the newspaper with a headline about the tragic passing of Walter. When looking at the paper in Act 2, the text will align with your choice regarding what method Walter took his own life. For example, in my second playthrough, I chose poison, so the paper mentions arsenic. Just as with the newspaper, some other things change depending on your own choices. When watching the tape with Juliana and trying to make sense of the green hallway, her comments will align with your interpretation of it. In the first playthrough, I said it looks like a museum, so she commented on the exhibit. If you instead say it looks like a school, she wonders if what you're seeing are classrooms, and notes that there are people wearing clothes that resemble her school uniform. If you say it's a prison, Juliana sees people inside of cells, and if you say it's a shopping mall, she comments on what she sees in the shop windows and that no one would sell such things. In the second playthrough, you get a lot of glimpses of things you already witnessed in your first, such as the clip of Walter when looking through the peephole. This clip also appears once when facing the TV in Act 2. If you go toward the window instead of heading to the apartment right away, you'll see this clip again, as well as a shot of Mrs. Martin's having a smoke. Additionally, if you saw Juliana in the elevator with her back to you during Act 3, this shot will pop up again when in the elevator during the start of Act 2. During your conversation with Mrs. Martins out in the hallway, you notice something in your pocket. It's simply referred to as the object, and you never say what it is. Additionally, there's extra dialogue options here where you can say that something is weighing on you. Each of these options prompts Mrs. Martins to ask if this is too much for you. She senses this as it's been too much for her, too. You can also note that the camera is too heavy, something you weren't able to do in your first playthrough. Depending on how your conversation goes, if Mrs. Martins doesn't manage to convince you to drop your camera, she instead tells you to go get your colleague and to leave as she wants her living room back. As you turn around to go back inside, lightning strikes, and we progress to Act 3 just as before. In Act 3, when you question the tape's contents, your choice changes the note you find by gunpowder down the hall. If you choose Unrecorded Nightmare, the note changes to say, "Now I have an unending nightmare in my brain, in an endless loop with no chance of escape. And what scares me the most? It's not much worse than the life I left behind." If you instead choose that you keep seeing and forgetting the name of what you saw, the note says, "Now all I see is edited in my memories. I am surrounded by forms, figures that mean nothing to me. Anything more than that terrorizes me, like the face in my memories." Regardless of what you choose though, the note will always begin with, "I've had it and I did what I shouldn't," and end with, "If anyone reads this, don't leave gunpowder alone." If you ignore gunpowder in this section and go straight to the apartment, you realize what it is that you've been smelling this entire time. It's ozone. The game doesn't let you enter the apartment without interacting with gunpowder first, however. If you try to, it simply rewinds, just as it did in Act 1 when trying to leave the building. There's an interesting and quite intense sound that plays in the background during this choice, but I'm unsure what it is. It reminds me of a VHS tape being rewinded, but I don't know if that's what it's actually meant to be. Going through the apartment and reaching the TV, this time there's a different clip playing at the end. It begins with Walter's broadcast, but then changes into the narration of a distorted voice talking directly to us.
Caros telespectadores, boa noite. Hoje nós teremos uma transmissão especial do nosso programa.
Pois, se está vendo isso, acredito que já seja tarde demais. As lentes deles já se tornaram nossos olhos. Tudo que vemos. Eu entendo o afã em buscar mais, entender mais. Mas já sabe o que aconteceu comigo por tentar fazer o mesmo. Por que seguiu esse mesmo caminho? Bom, não importa. Já chegou a verdade, telespectador. E ela tem um custo. Mas não precisamos pagar. Não precisamos nos submeter. Ouça. Eles não têm controle disso. Não ainda. Desligue o vídeo. Vá embora e não volte. Escapará por entre os dedos deles. A maior das rebeldias. Vá embora. Não volte.
Something else that's new after your first playthrough is that some areas are blurred out, almost as if censored using a pixel filter. You can't do anything with these in Act 1, but when interacting with the areas in Act 2, you get parts of a code. The first blurred out area is right on the VCR player. When interacting with it, you find a tape with something written on its label. It's faded though, so all you can make out is a T in front of unreadable numbers. Inserting the tape in the VCR player, a clip plays of Walter interviewing someone who's only referred to as a specialist on his show. The footage is distorted, and other random clips are spliced into it, ones that are hard to make sense of. The second area is on top of the small bookshelf where you originally find the electronics manual. There's normally nothing here, but when interacting with the glitch, there's apparently an old newspaper with a highlighted article that says, "Police has closed investigations on the missing persons case at a lake upstate. Nothing but one videotape has been found. The family protests against the police's inaction." The next thing that's blurred out is Walter's raincoat. You find a ripped notebook page in its pocket, which reads, "I keep seeing those same numbers, so I returned here." A metal box appeared. It has a numeric pad. I can't open it. Like metal trees, I saw 2 radio towers. The numbers once again. The fourth blurred out area is at the bottom of the big bookshelf. Apparently, there's a collection of VHS tapes, which are all labeled and organized, but number 5 is missing. When looking at this particular spot in Act 1, when it's not pixelated for more than a second, so you can actually see it clearly, there's what seems to be a VHS tape titled The Lake Murders. All of these parts together form a similar code you see on the timetable between Act 2 and 3. That code was T124, but this one is instead T125. The only place where you can use these codes in the game is right at the very beginning, in the elevator when Juliana tells you to press the button for the 6th floor. If you input the code T124 here, the elevator begins moving, and you make your way straight to the apartment. When the front door opens, though, it's not Mrs. Martin's on the other side. It's Walter himself. You're also not playing as a cameraman anymore. Instead, it turns out you're seeing this from the perspective of someone called the operator. He asks Walter to confirm that he has a VCR player, and then presents a special delivery, the tape. The scene then ends, and you return to the main menu. If you instead input T125 here, nothing happens. That can't be right. Let's try a different order. Inputting T512 makes the elevator move again. But this time it opens somewhere entirely different. In a forest. The same one we've seen short clips of earlier in the game. You question how you got here and state that you feel a presence nearby. As you move through the dark woods, you note that your thoughts are slippery. In order to hold on to them, you try to concentrate on the objects that led you here. First, the note, the one you found in Walter's raincoat. Then, the newspaper, the one with an article about a disappearance by a lake. Lastly, the tape, the old episode of TELEFORUM that you found by the VCR player. Successfully remembering these things, we keep trucking onward until we come across someone else, Walter himself. He says he's been wandering this place for a while. As you begin to respond, he stops you to say that his hands are tingling. Then he implores you to think carefully of what you want to say. Between asking where you are, saying that you've been to his apartment, and telling him that you watched the tape, I chose the last one. To this, Walter simply replies, "Your camera," and then, with the usual lightning strike, you're brought back to the main menu. The choice you make here changes his answer. If you tell him you went to his home, he simply replies with, "I'm very sorry." If you instead ask him where you are, his response is Mysenabyme. This is supposedly derived from the term Mysenabyme, which is an art technique where you place a copy of an image within itself, or even a story within a story. If you decide to return to the forest, you're unable to meet Walter again as you can't recall the old recording of TELEFORUM and instead think about the tape you and Juliana watched. Then you find a small boat by a lake. You state that your hands are tingling before choosing to sail the lake or to embrace the forest. Both choices lead to a lightning strike before you return to the main menu. You're unable to input the same code a third time after this, so if you want to return to the forest again, you have to play through the full game once more. That's pretty much all the important info the game gives us, and if you're feeling a bit confused right now, you're not the only one. There's a lot of clues in the story, but I find that these still give me so many questions. First off, it's stated that the smell in the apartment is ozone. Walter's electronics manual is bookmarked on a page about the CRT, which is the kind of TV they have in the apartment. The smell of ozone can come from such TVs, especially if damaged, which the one in the apartment is. However, the smell of ozone can also be produced by lightning, which is also a big part of the story. So what it is that causes the smell is uncertain, but regardless, what significance does this have? Then there's Juliana. Her name is initially spelled with one N. This is only true for the very first time you play through Act 1. After that, her name is forever changed to be spelled with two N's. Even in the credits, her name is obscured. According to an achievement you unlock if you pick Juliana with one N when remembering her name in Act 3, this is the correct spelling. Similarly, her portrait changes every act. I've looked at numerous gameplay videos to compare, and it seems like her portrait is always the same when you first start the game, but from that point on it keeps changing. So I assume what we see in Act 1 of our very first playthrough is her real face. My guess is that this is to show that your mind is only completely untouched in your initial playthrough up until you first watch the tape. Any subsequent playthrough will still be affected, as by that point you, the player, have already watched the tape, so it'll still be in your memory even if you start over. One more thing you can find in Act 3 is, of course, gunpowder by a stain on the floor, and a note. The stain is in the exact same spot where you last saw Mrs. Martin's, and judging by how gunpowder is lying next to it, obviously upset, I believe this is meant to symbolize the widow's disappearance. Even the note we find by gunpowder says, "I've had it and did what I shouldn't," which I think refers to her watching the tape. This also explains why the note ends with, "If anyone reads this, don't leave gunpowder alone," because with Mrs. Martin's gone, no one else would be left to take care of the dog. Additionally, after finding this note, the cameraman says she also, which confirms that the note does not belong to Walter. And I doubt it's Juliana who wrote it, as I don't see why she'd be worried about gunpowder. This leaves Mrs. Martin's as the only possible author. There are two leads that I believe give us the most vital information though, and they're both directly connected to Walter. One of them is the ending, where a distorted voice says things like, "Their lenses have become our eyes, all we see." I understand the enthusiasm, to search for more, to learn more, but you know what happened to me when I did the same. You've reached the truth, viewer, and it has a price. They have no control over this, not yet. Turn the video off. I think this is Walter speaking. Because of the sentence, I understand the enthusiasm to learn more, but you know what happened to me when I did the same. The meaning behind the rest of it is harder to decipher. The sentence, "Their lenses have become our eyes," is similar to the thing that you can say in Act 3. The camera carries me, not the other way around. This still leaves a lot of questions though. Who is they? Their lenses have become our eyes, they have no control over this. What is their end goal? What Walter can tell you if you meet him in the forest is the second thing that I find to be critical. As mentioned earlier, there's a reference to the term Mysenabyme, or placing a copy of something within itself. This is something we see a lot throughout. First, there's the fact that the game is called TELEFORUM, the same name as Walter's show, and the title cards for the two are the exact same. Also, the game itself is shown to us through a tape, found footage style. While watching the game itself through a camera as a tape, we also watch another tape within, the one that Walter was obsessed with. It's a VHS inside another VHS. I think it may go even deeper than that though. Between every act of the game, we hear the sound of a VHS tape being inserted. I wonder if this is to signal that every act is derived from the original, something that's infinitely multiplying, almost like a different timeline. Maybe a copy of the previous one. You know how when you make a copy of a copy and it becomes less clear the farther you go? That's essentially what happens between each act. Not only do the visual filters get more intense each time, but your memory deteriorates too. Things are blurring together. By the term's very definition, there's an amount of layers to this game, and we don't know exactly how many. Maybe we're not supposed to be able to figure that out. Maybe it's meant to be infinite, ever multiplying. One new timeline being created each instance we decide to play again. As the distorted voice implies, this only stops when we stop. I'm reminded of another game with a similar concept, the 2022 psychological horror Who's Lila. Big spoilers here, so skip ahead for a moment if you don't want to hear it, but the big twist is that the player character is actually possessed by an entity referred to as Lila. When trying to figure out who or what she is exactly, we find out about the terms of her existence. Basically, she only lives as long as people know about her. So by playing the game, Lila keeps on living as the knowledge of her continues spreading through us, the players. So, by continuing to play TELEFORUM, by continuing to consume these tapes in an attempt to get closer to the truth, you're only digging yourself a deeper hole, one that you eventually can't crawl out of. And that's what I assume happened to Walter. I won't discuss everything we see in the game, mostly because it all leads to even more questions in the end, each with a slew of theories attached. I do wonder what connection this all has to the lake that keeps being mentioned. There's the forest ending where we end up by a lake, Walter's raincoat that he used while covering a story by a lake, the painting of a lake that Mrs. Martins made because of a dream she had, the glitchy newspaper that mentions a disappearance by a lake. I of course assume these questions will be answered once Drowned Lake releases, but for now, all we have is this, a bunch of scattered clues that we can only hypothesize about. Sometimes the closer you look, the less you see. And I don't know whether or not that's the case here, but what I do know is that I've got a splitting headache from all of this. Thank you for watching.